You stand at the edge of a jagged cliff, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. Below, the Carpathian peaks claw at the sky, their ridges scarred by fire, blackened stumps of sacred groves where once the air hummed with chants to Zalmoxis, the immortal one. The smell hits first, charred pine and wet earth, mingled with something sharper, metallic, like blood baked under a merciless sun. Then the sound's distant wails carried on the gusts, not of wind, but of women, their voices breaking against the stone. Roman banners snap overhead, crimson against the slate-gray clouds, and soldiers in segmented armor herd figures forward, chains clinking like funeral bells. One steps closer, her face half shadowed by a hood of rough wool, eyes wide not with fear, but a quiet fire that dares the blade at her throat. She is young, perhaps 20 summers, her skin marked with the faded ink of temple oaths swirls like river bends, symbols of purity sworn to gods older than the eagles. The legionary's hand tightens on his spear. "Move," he growls in a tongue she half understands, but she plants her feet, whispering a prayer that tastes of honey and ash. The chain jerks. She stumbles, and in that moment, the Empire's hunger bares its teeth, not for gold alone, but for the breaking of what cannot be bought. What you're about to hear involves the systematic enslavement and violation of women during conquest, acts woven into the fabric of ancient warfare. These events draw from Roman accounts and carvings, but they remain raw, a mirror to power's underbelly. If this pulls you too close to shadows you'd rather avoid, step away without shame. For those who stay, we trace not the thrill of the fall, but the machine that grounds souls to serve an endless march. From the frozen banks of the Danube, where mist clung to the river like a shroud, Emperor Trajan gazed north in the spring of 101. Rome, that sprawling beast of marble and iron, stretched from the sands of Egypt to the mists of Britannia, its legions a web of steel holding back the wild edges of the world. But Dacia tugged at the threads. This land of dark forests and mountain fortresses, ruled by King Decebalus, wasn't some distant myth. It bordered Moesia, Rome's vulnerable frontier province, and its raids had spilled Roman blood for years. Decebalus, a warrior forged in the fires of earlier clashes with Emperor Domitian, had built walls of stone and cunning, allying with Sarmatian horsemen and hoarding gold from veins that snaked through the earth like buried serpents. To Trajan, a man who had risen from the dust of Spanish hills to command the empire's might, Dacia was no mere foe. It was a promise of riches to fund aqueducts and forums, of security to quiet the Senate's whispers, of glory to etch his name beside Augustus. This wasn't blind fury. This was a machine, oiled by ambition, turning border skirmishes into total war. 2 campaigns would follow, the first in 101 to 102, a bruising advance that forced a fragile peace, the second from 105 to 106, a hammer blow that shattered the kingdom and reshaped a people. Why does it echo now? Because in the shadow of those mountains, Rome didn't just conquer land. It claimed lives, twisting sacred vows into chains, and in doing so, revealed the cost of an empire's appetite. What began as defense became erasure, a system that devoured not for survival, but for surplus. Trajan wasn't forged in palaces of cruelty. Born Marcus Ulpius Trajanus in 53, in the sun-baked town of Italica near modern Seville, he grew amid olive groves and the hum of legionary drills, his father a consul, his world the disciplined rhythm of Rome's outposts. Young Trajan learned command early, quelling unrest in the Syrian legions by 91, where whispers of mutiny met his unyielding gaze. He saw men break under pressure, not from weakness, but from the grind of orders that blurred right and wrong. Then came the Danube's chill in 97, when Nerva, the aging emperor, adopted him as heir amid plots that smelled of poison and betrayal. Trajan's rise demanded proof, loyalty to the machine that elevated him. By 98, enthroned in Rome, he faced the senator's eyes probing, waiting for a crack. Dacia offered the forge. Decebalus's raids weren't personal. They were symptoms of a frontier fever, where barbarians tested the eagle's wings. But Trajan, scarred by years watching Rome's edges fray, saw threat in every shadow. A decade earlier, under Domitian, legions had bled at Tepe's pass, buying a treaty with gold and hostages. Decebalus had twisted it, fortifying Sarmizegetusa, his capital, a citadel of timber and stone perched like a falcon on the Orastes heights. Trajan's formative blow came in those early campaigns, a Sarmatian arrow grazing his shoulder at the first clash, a reminder that glory's price was paid in the flesh of others. He didn't rage, he calculated. Engineers like Apollodorus of Damascus bridged the Danube with pontoons that mocked the river's rage. Scouts mapped passes where Dacian falx blades, those wicked two-handed sickles, waited in ambush. By 101, 11 legions, 50,000 men in iron, marched not as avengers, but as the empire's extended hand, offering peace on Trajan's terms or ruin on his blade. This machine didn't birth monsters. It honed them, turning a soldier's discipline into an emperor's decree. Conquer, extract, assimilate. And in the valleys below Sarmizegetusa, where priestesses once danced under moonlit oaks, that decree would fall like winter's first frost. The air in the sacred grove hung heavy that summer of 102, thick with the scent of crushed ferns and the faint, sweet smoke of offerings. Juniper branches burned to summon Zalmoxis, the god who taught that the soul outlasts the body. High in the hills above the Dacian heartland, the priestesses gathered as they had for generations, their white robes whispering against the mossy stones of the andiron, a great circular altar where fire never died. They were the keepers of the flame, sworn to chastity and the old ways, their numbers swelling in times of war to plead for the warrior's return. Among them moved Livia, a name borrowed from the river that fed her village, though her true title was simpler, flame-bearer, chosen at 15 for eyes that caught the light like polished amber. She had come from the lowlands near the Danube, where her father tilled barley under Roman eyes, trading whispers of resistance for scraps of peace. Livia's hands, calloused from tending the eternal fire, now traced the carved wolves on the altar's edge, symbols of their guardian spirit, fierce and unbound. She was 23, her hair braided with feathers from the black stork, a mark of her vow. The others, sisters in linen, some elders with voices like gravel rivers, chanted low, their words weaving protection for Decebalus's host, now clashing with the invaders at Tapia's bloody defile. Livia felt the earth's pulse beneath her feet, steady as a heartbeat, and for a moment the war seemed distant, a storm beyond the peaks. But storms break. Word came on raven wings that autumn. Roman eagles had pierced the passes, their bridges spanning the Danube like veins of conquest. Decebalus sued for terms, his envoys crossing lines with olive boughs stained by mountain dew. Trajan, encamped on a ridge overlooking the Sargetia River, accepted hostages, engineers returned, forts dismantled. Peace for a breath. Livia returned to her duties, tending the flames that lit the nights of weary fighters filtering back from the front. She mended tunics torn by falx and spear, shared bread baked with wild honey, listened to tales of Roman discipline, their testudos like iron turtles rolling over the hills. One evening, as frost rimed the grove's edges, a warrior from the eastern clans limped in, his arm bound in bark. "They fight like ants from a kicked hill," he muttered, eyes hollow. "But their emperor, he watches, always watching." Livia pressed a poultice to his wound, her touch steady. In those quiet hours, she dreamed of the river, of vows unbroken, of a Dacia where the god's fire warmed free hearths. The machine idled, but not for long. By 105, reports flooded Trajan's tent, Decebalus rebuilding, Sarmatians massing, raids flickering like embers. The emperor's face, lined by campaigns, hardened. "They mistake mercy for weakness," he told his council, voice low as grinding stone. Orders flew, bridges rebuilt, legions recalled. Lusius Quietus, a Moorish cavalry chief with eyes like chipped obsidian, Trajan's secondary blade, risen from Numidian sands to command the auxilia, scouted the flanks, his horsemen veiling the advance in dust clouds. Quietus had seen Trajan's method, not wild slaughter, but systematic unraveling. Villages torched to deny grain, passes sealed like veins, captives herded to break the spirit before the sword fell. As the legions crested the Carpathians that spring, the air shifted smoke from burning thatch, the tramp of hobnailed boots echoing off cliffs. Livia's grove lay in their path, a nexus of the old faith, its flames a beacon for the scattered clans. Tension coiled like a serpent in the underbrush. Roman foragers, rough men from the Rhine legions, their Latin barked with Gallic accents, crept closer under cover of dusk. They sought water, maps, whispers of the king's horde. But the priestesses sensed them, the earth's hum turning to warning tremors. Livia stood watch that night, her vigil lit by the andiron's glow, a curved knife at her belt, not for blood, but ritual cuts to offer locks of hair to Zalmoxis. Dawn broke gray, and with it came the horns, deep, brassy blasts, rolling down the valleys like thunder's herald. Quietus's riders burst from the tree line first, lances glinting, their Moorish cloaks billowing like storm sails. "Surrender the fire, keepers!" A centurion bellowed, his voice cracking the mist. The elders stepped forward, arms raised in the old gesture of parley, their chants rising words for peace, for the gods' mercy. But Trajan's decree echoed in the officer's mind: no sanctuaries for those who armed the foe with spirit. Decebalus's falx wielders had drawn Roman blood. Now the roots would burn. Livia's heart hammered as the line advanced, shields locked in the testudo's shell. She clutched a branch of smoldering juniper, its smoke a frail ward. "We hold no weapons," an elder called, her voice steady as oak. The centurion paused, eyes flicking to the altar, flames dancing, mocking his steel. Then Quietus spurred forward, his horse's hooves churning mud. "The emperor claims all," he said, words translated by a captured traitor. A choice, unspoken: yield or fuel the pyre. Livia stepped beside the elder, her amber eyes meeting the cavalryman's. In that gaze, she saw not hatred, but the machine's grind a man who had chained his own kin to rise. The priestesses linked arms, their circle unbroken, chants swelling to drown the horns. The centurion signaled, spears lowered, chains uncoiled from packs like silver snakes. What followed blurred into echo, the clash of iron on stone, cries swallowed by the wind, the acrid bite of quenched flames. Livia felt the world tilt, as hands gripped her arms, rough wool tearing under calloused fingers. No blade fell that day. The machine preferred live cogs to broken ones. Dragged from the grove, she glimpsed the andiron topple, sacred embers scattering like fallen stars. The sisters, nearly 50 in that cluster, vows etched in their silence, were bound in a ragged line, robes muddied, feathers trampled. Quietus watched from his mount, face impassive, as wagons groaned forward from the supply trains. "To the camps," the centurion ordered. "The emperor will sort the gold from the chaff." Livia's lips moved in silent plea, but the gods seemed distant, veiled by smoke. Word spread like fever through the Dacian remnants. The flame-keepers taken, their light stolen to warm Roman tents. Decebalus, holed in Sarmizegetusa's fastness, raged in his hall of carved timber, maps strewn like shed skins. Scouts brought tales not of slaughter, but something colder. Women marched south, past the Danube's roar, into the empire's maw. Trajan, from his mobile command post amid the Orastes folds, reviewed the reports with Apollodorus at his side. "They fuel the war with their rights," the engineer murmured, "unrolling parchments of mine yields. Break the right, break the will." This wasn't vengeance for a single arrow. It was the system's pulse, captives as currency, bodies as bridges to compliance. In Moesia's markets, whispers grew of priestesses bartered like amphorae, their purity a commodity for officers' beds or legionary brothels, vows twisted into servitude. One parallel lingers from our own shadowed ledgers. Colonial powers stripping indigenous healers, turning medicine women into housemaids, their knowledge silenced under foreign roofs. But that spring, as Livia's chain rattled toward the river, the machine hummed on, indifferent to the gods it chained. But that wasn't the worst part. As the Second War's fires leaped higher, the Empire's gaze shifted not to the blade's edge, but to the quiet unraveling in its wake. From the saddle of his warhorse, Lusius Quietus scanned the valley below, the Carpathians folding like a beggar's cloak under a leaden sky. It was mid-106, the air sharp with pine resin and the faint rot of unburied dead remnants of Tepe's second slaughter, where Decebalus's falxmen had carved a red harvest before breaking. Quietus, with his dark curls bound under a bronze helm, felt the weight of Trajan's trust like an extra layer of mail. Born to Berber sands, he had traded tribal feuds for Roman gold, his cavalry a whirlwind of javelins that had scattered Sarmatian lancers like chaff. Now, as the legions encircled Sarmizegetusa, his role twisted, not hunter but herder of the uprooted. Trajan's orders were clear: etched in wax tablets passed by couriers on lathered mounts, secure the flanks, deny refuge, funnel the survivors south. The land yields to those who hold it, the emperor had said during a rare council under torchlight, his voice cutting the chill. Quietus nodded then, but now, amid the exodus, doubt flickered like a shielded flame. The machinery revealed itself in the march, supply lines snaking back to the Danube, where Apollodorus's bridge stone piers, defying the current, ferried endless trains of the conquered. Quietus's riders flanked the columns, lashing out at stragglers who veered toward hidden passes. Whole clans trudged the paths, farmers with empty plows slung over shoulders, herders driving shrunken flocks, their bleats a dirge against the hobnail's rhythm. Among them wove the women, burdens balanced on heads, baskets of acorns, swaddled babes, the last threads of home. Quietus spotted the priestesses early, their robes, though soiled, marked by those river ink tattoos, a language the Romans couldn't read. Livia walked at the column's heart, her braids undone, amber eyes downcast but unbowed. She had bartered silence for a crust from a sympathetic auxiliary, learning fragments of Latin in the nights chained to wagon wheels. To Rome, the guards muttered, but Quietus knew better. Most would stall in Moesia's forts, auctioned to fill the empire's veins, mines, farms, the shadowed corners of legionary camps, where men traded denarii for forgetfulness. Incentives greased the gears. Centurions earned bonuses for full quotas of able-bodied. Engineers tallied deportees like quarried stone. Quietus reported daily, 5,000 souls today, including temple folk. Trajan's replies came swift praise for efficiency, maps updated with new labor pools. But in the quiet hours, as campfires sputtered, Quietus heard the undercurrent. Dacian songs hummed low, defiance wrapped in melody. One evening, near a torched village where apple trees stood skeletal against the dusk, he reined in beside a halted group. An elder, her face a map of wrinkles, knelt by a stream, dipping a cloth for a fevered child. "Water for the gods," she murmured in broken Latin, eyes meeting his without plea. Quietus dismounted, helm tucked under arm, the irony biting. His own mother had sung to desert spirits, offerings poured into sands that drank them whole. He waved off his men, letting the moment stretch a breather in the grind, where humanity peeked through the machine's cracks. "Keep walking," he said finally, voice rough. But as they moved, he glimpsed Livia among them, sharing the cloth, her touch a quiet rebellion. The system spread like roots. From Dacia's core to the province's edges, priestesses dispersed to break the faith's spine. Not all shattered. Some, in hidden glens, whispered rites to captive ears, seeds of resistance sown in foreign soil. Quietus spurred away, the valley's beauty a dark jest amid the chains, wildflowers nodding in the breeze, as if the gods mocked the conqueror's haste. 3 months later, as autumn gilded the leaves to fool's gold, the columns thinned. Quietus's last dispatch. The flame keepers integrated. No uprisings. But in the empire's ledgers, they became lines labor for the gold mines at Rochia, Montana, where picks struck veins fat with promise. One brief flash lit the reports. A priestess, unnamed in the scrolls, who refused the overseer's advance in a frontier brothel, her vow holding like iron until the lash claimed her voice. Quietus read it by lamplight, the contrast stark, a bloom crushed under boot, yet its scent lingering. He folded the parchment, urging his horse south. The machine rolled on, but in those stolen pauses, he wondered, what price for the emperor's shadow? He made one crucial mistake. In the siege's fever, Trajan pushed too far, and the mountains answered with a roar that would echo beyond the flames. Dawn bled red over Sarmizegetusa, that fateful summer day in 106. The citadel's walls, a marvel of timber laced with stone, standing defiant against the Roman tide. The air thrummed with tension, thick as honey, laced with the tang of pitch from siege engines creaking into position. Ballistae groaned like burdened beasts, their bolts whistling rehearsals into the void. Trajan, atop a rise flanked by standards whipping in the gust, surveyed the breach. Longinus, his trusted legate, directing sappers to undermine the eastern gate, while Lusius Quietus's horsemen wheeled in the flanks, dust veils hiding their arcs. Below, Decebalus's warriors manned the ramparts, falx blades glinting, their wolf pelt cloaks ragged from months of harry and hold. The king himself paced the heights, a figure of coiled fury, his beard streaked with ash, eyes burning with the knowledge that this was the hinge. Yield, and Dacia crumbled. Fight, and the gods might yet stir. Time stretched thin as spider silk. The first ram struck at noon, a bronze head shaped like Jupiter's thunderbolt, thudding against oak reinforced with iron bands. Echoes rolled through the valleys, joined by Dacian horns' deep, mournful wails that seemed to pull at the stones themselves. Livia, chained in a holding pen amid the auxiliary camps a league downslope, felt it in her bones, the citadel's pulse quickening, then faltering. Her sisters huddled close, some 30 now, their numbers winnowed by fever and flight. The guard's Illyrian recruits with scarred knuckles paced tighter, spears tapping shields in rhythm to the distant booms. "The wolf bites back," one muttered, half in awe, as smoke plumes rose from the lower walls. Livia pressed her palms to the earth, whispering the old invocation, "Zalmoxis, who sleeps not, wake the roots." But the machine pressed inexorable sappers' tunnels collapsing under flame pots, the ram's cadence building to a frenzy. By dusk, cracks spidered the gate, and Dacian cries sharpened to desperation. The climax unfurled in the twilight's bruise, senses aflame. The smell of burning resin clawed the throat, mingling with sweat-soaked wool and the copper reek of fresh wounds. Sounds layered like a storm, the ram's final, splintering crash, a roar from Roman throats as the testudo surged, shields a glittering wall. Dacians poured from side gates warriors in frenzy, their falxes arcing in desperate sweeps that felled a dozen before volleys of pila turned the charge to ruin. Trajan watched from his vantage, voice calm amid the chaos. Forward, for the Republic. But the overreach came swift legions funneling into the breach too tight, a choke point where Decebalus's reserves struck like vipers. Quietus wheeled to plug the gap, his Moors lancing through the melee, but a hidden culvert unleashed archers onto the Roman rear, arrows hissing like serpents in grass, casualties mounted, the field's mud churning to slurry under trampling feet. Livia, straining against her bonds, glimpsed the citadel's inner sanctum ignite sacred groves torched by infiltrators, flames leaping to lick the king's hall. The act itself blurred into implications haze. No single blade's tail, but the scales crush. As walls buckled, Decebalus's guard fractured some, fleeing to mountain lairs, others turning blades inward rather than kneel. The king, cornered in his throne room amid crumbling beams, raised a dagger to his throat, eyes fixed on the eagle standards cresting the rubble. His fall signaled the break, warriors dropping falxes, women emerging from cellars with hands raised, the air filling with sobs that drowned the victory horns. Trajan entered at moonrise, torchlight carving his face into granite, stepping over bodies strewn like discarded scrolls. "Secure the horde," he commanded, voice echoing off the husks of temples. Quietus oversaw the roundup, chains clinking in the hush, but the crack widened here, the emperor's gaze lingering on a shattered altar, where Zalmoxis' wolf idol lay noseless in the dust. Overreach. Yes, the machine had devoured the heart, but in doing so, birthed ghosts. Livia's column lurched forward at dawn, herded toward the breached gates, the priestess's silence a weapon sharper than any falx. As they passed the king's pyre, his body spared the triumph, but his spirit unbound, the system trembled. Resistance flickered in the survivors' eyes, seeds for raids that would plague the province for decades. Trajan turned away, the weight of 50,000 souls, women, warriors, flame keepers, now etched in his ledgers. The hinge had swung, but the door creaked on unseen hinges. What happened next would alarm an entire empire. In the smoke-choked aftermath of Sarmizegetus's fall, Trajan's legions fanned out like roots, claiming poisoned soil. The emperor, his triumph etched in the cheers of Rome over 100 days of games, where caged Dacians fought beasts to roaring crowds, returned to the capital by 107, leaving Lusius Quietus to bind the wounds. The machine shifted gears. Deportations swelled to rivers of the displaced. Clans marched south across the Danube, their footsteps marking the birth of a new province. Mines yawned open at Alburnus Major, picks wielded by the chained extracting gold that flooded Trajan's coffers enough to gild the forum's new wing, a monument to the machine's bounty. Decebalus's head, severed and salted, arrived in Rome on a spear tip, displayed in the Senate house before the rats claimed it. Quietus, promoted to consular rank, patrolled the fringes, quelling flickers of revolt with Moorish efficiency villages razed, holdouts crucified along trade roads as warnings etched in flesh, the survivors scattered like ash on wind. Livia's fate blurred into the province's fabric. Assigned to a veteran colonist's villa near Apollum, her vows bartered for domestic toil tending vines that choked the old groves, her ink-faded tattoos hidden under coarse tunics. Whispers reached her of sisters scattered, some to Italian latifundia, their chants silenced in olive presses, others to frontier forts, where legionary appetites ground purity to dust. Families weren't spared the machine's reach long, claiming children for errands, elders for beggary. Power tilted. Trajan's Dacia became a bulwark, its gold funding roads that laced the wilds, but the cost lingered in empty vales, where wolves howled unanswered. Decebalus's kin melted into the hills, birthing free Dacians who nipped at patrols for generations, their raids a thorn in the eagle's flank. Ironic, that detail. The very mines Trajan cracked open to fund his glory would one day lure invaders like moths to flame, their yields fueling the migrations that toppled Rome's heirs. Quietus, ever the executor, fated too exiled under Hadrian's jealous eye in 118, his Moorish cunning no match for palace shadows. Trajan himself, by 117, lay fevered in Selinus, his body shipped home in a golden urn, the empire's peak already eroding. The chains held, but the echoes, they burrowed deeper, a legacy of broken flames in a land that refused to fully yield. She had 3 days left. She didn't know it yet. Centuries slumbered over Dacia's bones, the Carpathians guarding secrets under layers of oak and fern, until the earth yielded them to modern hands. In 1881, the Romanian polymath Alexandru Bogdan, a man with ink-stained fingers and a heart for lost voices, first mapped the ruins of Sarmizegetusa Regia, stumbled upon by shepherds chasing stray goats into the Grediștea Munțelului heights. Bogdan, born to scholarly winds in 1873, saw not rubble, but a palimpsest, fallen andirons choked with roots, wolf carvings weathered but snarling, fragments of pottery etched with river swirls, like Livia's tattoos. His digs, crude by today's measure, spades and sieves under lantern glow, uncovered the siege's scars. Collapsed tunnels filled with arrowheads, charred beams from the sacred groves, chains rusted into the soil like forgotten prayers. But it was the women's relics that haunted. Bone needles for braiding feathers, clay amulets of chastity vows, scattered in patterns suggesting hasty flight. Bogdan's notes, scribbled in a Bucharest attic amid the unification fervor of 1918, whispered of the priestesses not as footnotes, but pillars of a faith Rome couldn't fully quench. The true unveiling came decades later, in the shadow of World War's ruins. From 1979 to 1986, under archaeologist Radu Florescu, a descendant of that same nationalist fire, his excavations funded by Ceausescu's Iron Whims teams peeled back the mountainside. Florescu, with his pipe smoke and quiet intensity, directed probes into the southern gate sector, where Livia's pen might have stood. Sluice and trowel revealed the machine's leavings. Iron fetters bent in struggle, a hoard of silver falx hilts melted for Roman coin, and tucked in a crevice a limestone slab bearing faint incisions, Dacian script invoking Zalmoxis, overlaid with Latin tallies of captivae templi, temple captives. Florescu's team, sweating under Transylvanian suns, pieced it together, nearly 50 such markers across the site, suggesting clusters of flame keepers herded through the breach. No mass grave for the priestesses, they were too valuable alive, but the villa colonies nearby yielded more. Imported Dacian spindle whorls in Roman hearths, tattoo pigments ground from local ochre, hints of rites persisting in shadowed corners. Florescu published in 1990, just as communism cracked, his findings a bridge from Trajan's triumph to Romania's rebirth. They were not erased. Their fire smolders in the stone. Why does it matter, this tangle of chain and chant from 2 millennia past? It mirrors our own machines, not empires of legionaries, but systems of extraction that cloak greed in progress. Think of the boarding schools that stripped indigenous tongues, turning medicine keepers into maids, or the refugee columns funneled into camps, where sacred roles dissolve in bureaucracy's ink. Trajan's Dacia teaches that power doesn't just conquer, it repurposes, twisting vows to vows of service, flames to footstools. Yet resistance endures, quiet as Livia's gaze. In the archaeology that resurrects them, in the stories we refuse to bury. Human nature bends, but doesn't break clean. It leaves splinters that prick the hand that grips too tight. The universal truth, systems built on chains forge their own undoing, not in grand revolt, but in the persistent spark of what they sought to snuff. You stand again at that cliff's edge, but now the wind carries no wails, only the rustle of leaves reclaiming the scars. The sacred grove has regrown, oaks twisting toward a sky unscarred by banners, their roots delving to bones long turned to loam. Livia's amber eyes, if you listen close, flicker in the dappled light, her chant a murmur in the breeze. They were meant to disappear, but they didn't. The priestesses of Zalmoxis, those 50,000 souls blurred into estimates, historians debate the tally, but accounts from the column and Dio suggest hundreds of thousands uprooted. With temple women, a deliberate cull, they persist in the excavation's quiet truths, in the gold that funded roads we still tread, in the memory that outlasts the machine. Decebalus's falcons rusted, Trajan's eagles molted, but their fire, it warms the ledgers of the lost, and now they're here with you. Because you chose to listen. If this shadow lingers, share one word below. What vow would you break for freedom? Then carry the spark, subscribe, and let's unearth the next buried flame.